is this issue with tests that need a special environment to run. So for example, you might have tests that require a dedicated or special JDK. So you want to do some cross JDK version testing, or you need a database to be available on that machine. Or maybe you have some tests that you want to run on a particular operating system because you have this cross operating system problems with file path and line endings. And so you have some tests that only execute, for example, on Linux or only execute on Windows. And I really want to show you that, how we support that. So I have this base test in the P4 package that all the other tests inherit from. So whatever configuration I apply to this base test will be applied to all the other tests. And I also prepared the Linux only annotation, which is a composed JUnit 5 annotation that tags all the tests with a particular tag and enables them to be run only on Linux operating system. So as you could imagine, if I run this test now, they would be skipped on my machine because I'm using Mac OS and not Linux. So what can we do about that? So the first idea that I have is we should partition our tests into a test task that only executes the tests that don't have any requirements, and one task that has this special Linux testing. So let's do this. I will add a filter here on the default test task, and I'll use the exclude tags filter facility and define it with Linux. So this will cause the default test task to skip all the tests that I marked with Linux only. So let's go ahead and create another test task that executes the Linux tests. So I'm creating this test Linux task. And then what I want to do is the opposite of this exclude. Here, I want to include only the things that are tagged with Linux. So now the test Linux task will only execute those tests. So if I run that now, that will skip basically all the tests because they are marked as being skipped on Mac OS. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to do on my machine. But actually, I didn't run it because it came from the cache, as you can see. So I should maybe rerun tasks again, that you can see that they are all skipped. Yeah, that was pretty fast. But we can go to the build scan and see that they were all skipped. I'm doing that right now. So all the 200 tests were skipped, and that makes sense because I'm using macOS, as I said before. So let's make sure this is running distributed and that this is only running on agents that have macOS, Linux running. Sorry about that. So again, we want to configure test distribution, and we want to set it to enabled again. And then we have this requirements API that you can use, and it's basically a string-based API where you can define the requirements that your test task has. So let me set OS equals Linux, and the agents, when they start up, they do some detection of the environment they are running it in. So they will set a tag for, or they will set a capability basically saying which OS they have. So our agents are all running on Linux, so all the agents will match this requirement. We also detect the Java version that they are running with. So there's also a Java capability on the agents that you can use. And as Mark will show later, there are some ways for administrators to add custom capabilities to agents. Okay, so I now have this filter in place and I have the requirements configured. If I run it again, then this should be distributed to our distributed test infrastructure. But as you can see in the console view, 20 tests were skipped again. So why is that? Of course, it's because I'm still using the local executor here. I haven't deactivated it. I just said this test task should run distributed, but I didn't say anything about my local machine. So we should fix that, but we want to make sure that, for example, my colleague Daniel is still able to use his local executor because he is running on Linux. He's developing on a Linux machine, so he might want to use his local executors. Or if this build is executed on CI, that CI agent might also want to use the local executor if that CI agent is running on Linux. So let us just add some logic here. And I'm using system utils from Apache Commons Lang. That's pretty handy for things like this. There is a constant defined on that class called isOSLinux. And I'm saying, okay, if I'm not on Linux, so if I'm on macOS, for example, I don't want to use local executors at all. So I set it to 0. And if I run this test task again now, we will see that all the tests are executed. And here we go. We can have a look at the build scan and observe that all tests were executed. So 200 tests passed. And if we go back to the custom values that I showed before, you can now see that 0 local executors were used, but 12 remote executors were used. And this is a really, really powerful feature. Think about it. You can run tests from your local machine. You can start tests on a different operating system. So you don't have to go through all the loops by committing something to Git and then pushing it and then creating a pull request and then starting something on CI and then waiting until it is executed. You just do it from your local machine. You don't have to do this context switch. You just have this basically this interface that Gradle provides to you. And to make this complete, you would usually want to define a dependency between the check task and the test Linux task, so that test Linux is always run. And now if I say Gradle build again, this will make sure that the test task is executed and the test Linux task is also executed. As you might know, Gradle executes tasks inside a project sequentially. So it will first execute the default test task, and there is a test Linux task that will be executed on the remote testing infrastructure again. And that is all I wanted to show for the demo. And with that, I'm giving it back to Mark.